When we think of World War II and of naval combats between Nazi Germany and the Allies, we instantly think of submarines and of all the wolf packs attacking Allied convoys. But the Germans, especially in the first part of the war, sent also other kinds of vessels. Surface ships such as the Bismarck, the Gneisenau, or maybe the Admiral Graf Spee. They sent also other kinds of ships. Ships which were meant to hunt down and destroy enemy cargo. Those were the feared raiders. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today, yet another review, and yet another very strange video, because although on my channel I release sometimes very odd videos focused on very obscure games, this one will be really exceptional. This will be the review of a print-and-play game released in 2011 under the name of Raider 16 Atlantis. Raider 16 is a game designed in 2011 by Bruce Mansfield, the same guy who designed a few years ago Gandhi, the decolonization of British India. So this is his earlier design back from 2011. Bruce designed this game when entering a competition on BoardGameGeek, which was focused on creating the best wargame, the best solitaire print-and-play wargame. Raider 16 entered this contest and it won it. It was considered the best solitaire wargame, print-and-play wargame designed in 2011 in this contest. At that point, when I heard of this game, when I saw that it was so highly priced, I downloaded the files from BoardGameGeek and I assembled my own copy. Since then, I played it really a lot. I played it back in 2012-13. I returned to it from time to time, and very recently I decided to revisit it, to play again a lot this game, and I really, as always, had a blast with it. I also recorded a Polish playthrough consisting of 2 very long parts. If you're interested in taking a look how I managed to survive the whole confrontation with the Royal Navy, you can take a look at it. But returning to Raider 16, this game is focused on World War II and on the story of the Atlantis Hilfskreuzer, the auxiliary cruiser, which was one of several auxiliary cruisers used by Germans during World War II. When we think of World War II, as I said at the beginning of this video, when we think of the naval battles between Germany and the Allies, we think instantly of submarines. But Germans used also capital ships, surface ships, such as the Bismarck, the Tirpitz, the Admiral Graf Spee. But they used also auxiliary cruisers, which were disguised as merchants and which were sent to the Atlantic and to the Indian Ocean in order to track down and destroy enemy ships. Atlantis was one of such ships, but in the game we can also take control of the Tor or of the Cormoran, which are other auxiliary ships also used by the Germans during the Second World War. During the game, as I said, our objective will be to firstly track down and to destroy or to take control, to seize enemy vessels, maybe to send them back to Germany, and at the same time to survive, because the Royal Navy will not be just sitting and waiting. It will be hunting down our merchant, our auxiliary cruiser, trying to locate it and then attack it and destroy it. At the same time, we will be also trying to decipher the BAMS code, British and Allied merchant ships code, used by the British during the Second World War, because when seeing some markers on the map board, we will not be certain if they represent real ships or are they only dummies. In order to better locate or focus on the counters which can be valuable targets, we will be trying to decipher this code. But this also will mean that the British will try to change this code from time to time, and if they do, the code will be reset and we will have to will have to decipher it from the start. A very interesting game which I would like to present you today, which I would like to show you today, explain briefly how it works, and at the end of the video, as always, I'd like to give you my final thoughts concerning this game. So let's jump right into it and let's take a look at how Raider 16 Atlantis looks. Here is a brief look at Raider 16 Atlantis. The game is a print and play game, so as you can see, before playing you have to download the files, you have to print them, you have to prepare both the board as well as the BAMS charts, the cards and all the counters. Before you start playing, you should assemble the game, and before each game you should choose your own raider. Now in the game we can take control of 3 different raiders, of Atlantis, of Cormoran and of Thor. Each of them was a Hilfskreuzer, a German auxiliary cruiser used during World War II. Each card, each vessel that you choose has two parameters. Firstly, the maximum number of cards that you can have in your hand. Secondly, this is also the number of prize ships that you can have at any given moment. After choosing your raider, for instance Atlantis, you should draw a number of cards corresponding to your max number of cards that you can have, and you should also set up the counter corresponding to your raider on the playing area. Now the playing area is divided into zones, and we have 2 kinds of zones. We have ship lanes and over zones. The difference is between them as follows. Firstly, on ship lanes it is much more easy to find enemy ships, enemy cargo ships, because those are the places through which normal ships would travel between locations. The over ones are more rarely used and it's more difficult to find any ships in them. At the same time, it is less, due to the fact that they are used less often, it's also safer to be in those zones because enemy ships will probably not be moving through them. Before you start playing, you should also prepare contact markers, because in the game we receive 2 types of markers. We receive suspicion markers, which will be used in order to indicate how much suspicion our activity raised among the British troops and how much information about our current location do the British have. The second kind of markers are contact markers, which will be used in order to show where potential enemy ships, cargo ships, are present. Now those markers are double-sided. On one side they have symbols, and on the second one they have a number. Each counter has also its own color, green ones and red ones, and the difference will be related to the arrows on the playing board, because those markers will be moved during play and they will always move in the direction shown by the arrow of their corresponding color. So at the start of the game we will place randomly using die rolls 4 such markers, and during play our objective will be to locate those counters, to verify their identity, and if they represent enemy ships we will try to attack them, sink them or take them as our prize. The objective of the game is to score 25 victory points, and those victory points will be at most times granted for sinking enemy vessels or for taking them as prize and sending them back to Germany. Each ship that we can encounter will have several information. Firstly, they will have a number of dice indicating how much defense they will put on during a fight. Secondly, what is the number of points that we can score if we sink such a ship. Some ships have also an indication saying that they can be worth additional victory points if we manage to take them as a prize. We have also, what is extremely interesting and extremely important, a picture depicting how they looked and their fate, indicating what happened to them historically during the war. But before we start sinking enemy ships, we have to locate them. And this is the most interesting part of the game, because during the game we will start each turn by drawing a card from the deck and by activating a turn event. We have several kinds of events, and those events can consist of For instance, randomly placing new contact markers, which means that we will add new contact markers to the playing area. We can also move all the contact markers, which will mean that each marker will move in accordance to their color and in accordance to the arrow of depicted on the area where they are located. And after such a movement, they can happen to be in a different place than at the start of the turn. If a marker starts the turn in a port space and a movement is drawn, they are removed from the map board as long as they are in a port of the same color as their own counter. But different things can also happen. We can randomly return suspicion markers to the cap. We can also place suspicion markers to the playing area, and we can activate all Royal Navy forces on the map. At the game start, we have no Royal Navy forces present, but it is possible to place up to 3 Royal Navy forces on the playing area. Those will be placed due to card draws, which will activate specific forces. When speaking of suspicion markers, we have the second cheat pool. We have the second markers pool, which are the suspicion markers. Those will indicate how much suspicion is laid upon our own presence in a given ocean. And when attacking a merchant ship, this ship can send a distress call. If they do, we put those markers onto the playing area. Those markers are of different types. The first one is low suspicion, which means that there were some information about maybe an enemy vessel in the area, but they are unconfirmed and they are not very highly probable. The second level of suspicion is the QQQ signal, which indicates that an enemy ship sent such a signal, meaning that they were under attack by an unidentified ship. Probably an enemy vessel, but it was not confirmed. But the suspicion of an enemy vessel operating in the area is really high. The highest level of probability is the RRR symbol, which means that a ship was attacked by a merchant raider, which was confirmed as a raider. And this is the absolutely most certain level of presence of an enemy vessel in the area. Now, those markers will appear on the map board due to different factors, and when they do appear, they can trigger the additional draw of new markers if they are markers of the highest 2 levels. Additionally, they also will attract the movement of Royal Navy ships towards them, because a Royal Navy ship, a Royal Navy force present in a given area will always move in the direction of the marker of the highest suspicion level. And if it happens that our own raider is present in the same area, this can trigger a battle, and this can force the game into an end, because the game ends in several ways. Firstly, if our raider is intercepted by a British force and it is sunk, the game immediately stops. We verify if we score 25 victory points or not. Secondly, if we are also sunk by a merchant cruiser, because there are some ships which are merchant cruisers using red dice, which can try to sink us, a fight will ensure and we have to sink the enemy or be sunk, and the game ends at that point. Or if a special card is drawn from the deck, the orders from SKL, which triggers the game end as long as there are 3 British forces on the map. If there are 3 forces, we have to return to Germany immediately if we manage to score additional points. But again, we verify if we manage to score 25 points or more, which would mean that we won the game. Otherwise, we have lost. But in order to attack enemy forces, we firstly have to locate them, and this is not such an easy task, because during the game we will be trying to decipher the BAMS code, which is, in my opinion, the most fun part of the entire game. When trying to find enemy vessels, we will be trying to inspect the contact markers which are in the same area that ours. But before, we have to enter into such an area, because when drawing the card at the start of the turn, when triggering the event, we also receive 2 additional information. Firstly, the conditions for the turn, which can be stormy, which can be night or clear, which will influence also the number of action points that we have during a given turn.
In order to move, we have to spend 1 action point. This doesn't require the play of a card, but for 1 action point, we can move 1 space. We cannot move more than 1 space during a single turn. Additional action points during night and during day turns can be spent in order to search for additional ships or to attack them. Search is done while playing a card with the corresponding binocular symbol, which enables us to search for additional counters. If we successfully roll the die in order to search for additional counters, we can add new contact markers to the area where we are present. Additionally, sometimes we can trigger additional capacities if the conditions under which we play this action apply. And additionally, if we play a card for the second symbol, the symbol of an attack, we can also try to locate, or rather to approach to a marker, to inspect it, and potentially to attack a found ship. Now the process is simple. We verify the identity by looking at its back, which indicates a number, which then will be used in order to read the corresponding result in the BAMS code table. Now, before the game starts, we draw 1 card from the deck in order to indicate the initial BAMS code. We inspect only the middle part of the card, the middle bottom part, which indicates the current BAMS code, which we can indicate, for instance, using a die. Then, when playing the game, if we, for instance, inspect a counter which has a 16 on its back, we will be looking for the result of such an inspection on the place of the chart corresponding to the place where the number of the marker and the current BAMS code are meet each other. And here we can have one of 3 results. A dot means that this counter is a dummy, which means that we have found nothing. A 1 indicates that we have a limited contact, and a 2 means that we have a very good precise contact. So what all those 3 information mean? The first scenario, in which we have a dummy, no contact, means that such a counter, which has 2 symbols, indicates that none of those symbols is currently part of the actual BAMS code, because the BAMS code at every time of the game will have only 3 digits in it, 3 from among all those possible. So knowing that a counter had absolutely no contact means that none of those symbols will be part of the real BAMS code, which again tells us that, for instance, approaching another counter which has the hash symbol gives us only limited chances of finding a ship, because the hash is a no contact, but maybe the exclamation symbol will be a contact, but we have only 50% of chances, or even less, because we have more potential symbols which can be part of the BAMS code. On the other hand, if the result was a 2, that would mean that both those symbols are currently part of the BAMS code, which gives us a certainty that approaching a counter having either of those symbols gives us a limited chance of finding a ship somewhere in the area. So for instance, if I inspect such a counter, I will receive a 1 or a 2. I know that the hash is certainly a limited contact. If the exclamation is also a contact, I will find a 2, so a certain contact. And if the exclamation is a dummy, I know that I will still find something thanks to the hash being part of the actual BAMS code. On the other hand, if this was a 1, that would mean that one of those 2 symbols is currently part of the BAMS code, and then using deduction, inspecting over counters, we can finally come to a conclusion which of those 2 symbols is actually part of the BAMS code. So this inspection, this deduction is really the fun part of the game, because knowing what counters are more interesting than others allows us to move in their direction, inspect them, and then potentially attack them. The attack process is extremely simple. We draw a card from the draw deck, and we see how much resistance the ship will apply. We roll the dice for the defender, we roll 2 dice for our own ship, and we have to score results higher than the defense. If we score the same number, it's possible to capture an enemy if we played a specific card allowing us to capture an enemy ship. If we do sink an enemy, we score a number of victory points indicated on the card. If we take them as a prize, we can score also additional points for certain ships. After such an attack, we draw a suspicion marker in order to see if the attacked merchant managed to send a distress call, and we place a marker. Now, when drawing cards from the deck, either it be for replenishing our hand or maybe to play an event at the start of the turn, we will be sometimes also drawing special cards. Orders from SKL can end the game. We verify if Royal Navy forces are present on the map. Royal Navy cards will put new force markers onto the playing area if a test is successful, and additionally they can reset the BAMS code, which means that all the deduction that we did up to this point will be not valid, and we will have to restart this deduction process from the start because a new code will be imposed. And finally, we have also a Royal Navy redeployment card, which can make us to shuffle the deck and also to redeploy all the Royal Navy forces, putting them onto spaces where the highest probability of finding a raider are. So this can happen in putting them inside the same area that our raider is present and potentially triggering an intercept and maybe sinking our raider. After executing all our actions, we end the turn, we draw cards to replenish our hand, and we start a new turn by drawing a new card and by applying the event. We play in such a way until our raider is sunk or until the end of the game is triggered and we return to Germany, at which point we verify how many points we scored and we see if we won the game or if we lost. Those are basically all the basic rules of Raider 16. I won't be explaining any additional ones during this part of the video because I'd like to invite you to the final part, during which I'd like to tell you what I think about this game, what I enjoyed in it, but what I also think can be some weaker points of this design.
Raider 16 Atlantis is a bizarre game, even by the standards of my very strange channel. The reason is that this is a print-and-play game which disappeared from BoardGameGeek for a very long time. The game, designed by Bruce Mansfield, was supposed to be published by one of the wargaming publishers, but as far as I know from the message that I received from Bruce when I asked him this question, the game will never be released, and the files concerning Raider 16 can be re-uploaded. I hope that Bruce already did it, or maybe that he will do it in some time. Raider 16 is a game which I have in my collection for more than 10 years because I downloaded the files, I prepared my own copy in 2012 or even at the end of 2011. And I enjoyed this game really a lot, both at the time as well as now. This is a game which instantly attracted my attention because I love naval games focused on very strange, on very odd topics. And raiders, German auxiliary cruisers, Hilfskreuzers, are such a topic. Games which are focused on the Hilfskreuzers in the Second World War are very scarce, and Raider 16 is therefore one of the titles which in some way makes this topic even more interesting, because if we have a lot of games covering a topic such as, for instance, the Bulge or Gettysburg, we tend to not be interested by additional games about this subject. We already have our own favorites, we know well the story, so what to expect from a new game? But here the situation is totally different. Up to the time when Raider 16 was designed and released on BoardGameGeek, the topic was unexplored. It was something which was very unique, something which is extremely interesting, so which deserved to be the topic of a game. So I'm really happy that Bruce decided to design such a game. So the first thing which I would like to underline when looking at this game as a product, never released, but a product in terms of how we understand it, is the fact that this game is focused on an extremely interesting topic. I'm a great fan of naval war games. One of my favorite games at some point was The Kaiser's Pirates, released by GMT Games, which is focused on the German auxiliary cruisers of World War I. So Raider 16 automatically attracted my attention, and it was something which I really wanted to try. And I must say that after assembling the game, after giving it a try, I was really pleased. This game is extremely clever. So looking at additional elements which I like, apart from the topic, apart from its setting, is the way how the author tackled the subject, adding a lot of chrome, adding a lot of historical details to it, because this game is full of historical flavor, and I really love it. I think that it's immersive, it's educational at the same time, so it has really a lot of strong points in this manner. The first one, when we speak of historical elements, are obviously the pictures on the cards which we are using, because Raider 16 is obviously a card game, a game in which cards will be a very important element of the whole system, and on each and every card we get a picture of the ship which is depicted. So we have historical photos of each and every ship which is present in the game, which were sunk or maybe captured by the German raiders. So we can read about their fate, we can see what the tonnage was. This adds a lot of depth. This also adds a lot of flavor to the game, and I really enjoy it. The second element, which is in my opinion the most interesting aspect of Raider 16, is obviously the BAMS code, the British Allied Merchant Ships Code. And this is such a brilliant idea to include this element to the game. Firstly, it adds flavor again. Secondly, it adds this logical deduction to the mechanisms, which makes you constantly try to decipher this code in order to see which counters, which markers present on the board constitute real ships and which ones are dummies. This is a brilliant idea. This is something which I always liked in this game. And when you read the rules, this might seem very complicated. This might seem very obscure, bizarre. You do not know how to use those mechanisms. But then when you play your first game, when you see how this mechanism is brilliantly used, you just say, wow, this is such a great idea, and I love how Bruce decided to include it in the game. Not only extremely climatic, but at the same time adding an additional layer of play. So the fact additionally that the BMS code changes during the game and resets the whole conditions is again another factor which I really like in the game, because it is again a historical element. The British changed this code several times during the war, and due to skyrocketing losses, the British might change this code in order to try to hinder the operations of German auxiliary cruisers, and it can also apply to our game. We have deciphered all our code, great, we can see that those markers constitute real ships, but now a new Royal Navy marker appears and the BMS code is instantly reset, and we have to decipher it once more from the start. Brilliant, extremely interesting mechanism. When speaking of it, I'd say that in general, the mechanisms and the topic of the game are so well linked in Raider 16 that you can focus on playing at the same time enjoying how this game works. So you do not feel that something is displaced, something is very odd. All the mechanisms used, not very complex, are very well linked to the theme, which makes the game so immersive and so interesting that I always enjoy it each time I play it. The last thing, which in my opinion is a very strong point of Raider 16, is the fact that in the game you will be making tons of decisions, and you will be at the same time trying to manage your resources. Firstly, your cards, But the second thing is your time. And how to manage your time in Raider 16 is extremely important because, remember, in order to win, we have to score a certain number of points for capturing or for sinking enemy ships. But you have to do it before you are ordered back to Germany. If you are very cautious, if you do not enter enemy lanes, if you do not try to hunt some counters which are closer to Royal Navy markers, this might not work. Sometimes you have to risk. If you concentrate all the game on trying to find some markers very far away from the shipping lanes, you will fail because time will run out. You will run out of time. And I like this aspect because you have to score a certain number of points. You have to try to make your best of the situation in which you are in order to score a victory. At the same time, you have to manage your cards. You have only a certain amount of cards in your hand. You have to decide which ones used to search, which ones used to hunt, which ones used to keep in order maybe to get rid of a difficult situation in which you are maybe sometimes, in which you can sometimes happen to be in. So this is also a very interesting element, and managing your cards, deciding when to use them, how to use them, is basically one of the most interesting and most important things which you will be doing during the game. At the same time, Raider 16 Atlantis is also a game which has some flaws. And now I'd like to say you a few words what I think are the weaker points of this design. Firstly, this was a print and play game. So I won't be speaking about the quality of the elements because that would be unfair, but the thing which deserves to be underlined is the fact that although this game entered the contest, it won this contest, there were some errors in it. And when downloading the rulebook and when searching and when reading it, even when using the components and the BMS code, there were some mistakes in them. So if you play this game, if the files are re-uploaded by Bruce, you should take a look if this edition, if this version was updated and if it included all the things which were discussed in the BGG topics concerning the rules, because there were some errors and you should be aware of that, because if you will not, this might hinder your gameplay. Secondly, what I found quite repetitive are the raiders themselves, because although we receive 3 raiders in the game, the Atlantis, the Thor raider and the Cormoran raider, they pretty much work the same way. And the only difference between them are the number of cards that you can have and the number of prizes that you can have, which means that they will be used in order to increase the difficulty level of playing. Atlantis being the easiest one because you can have 4 cards in your hand, you can have several prizes, whereas the other ones will enable you to have fewer cards in your hand, which means that you will have more time, but at the same time you will have less opportunities, less options while playing your turn. More time because you will be drawing less constantly, so you will be playing longer. But at the same time you will have very limited options while having only 2 cards in your hand. I would love to receive, for instance, 1 additional special capacity for each raider, meaning that playing each game would be different, not only due to the number of cards that I have in my hand, but also due to my options that I possess. That would be a nice addition. Another thing which should be said is the fact that Raider 16 is quite a long game. This is a game which can end very abruptly, but it can also drag for several hours. And the problem is related to the way how the Royal Navy markers are drawn and how the end of the game is triggered. And it is possible to play this game for a very, very long time, because if all the Royal Navy markers are already present on the board, then it's up to how the cards remaining in the deck are sorted. If the card ordering you to return to Germany is drawn first, you will end the game and you will score points, you will see if you win. But if the Royal Navy redeployment is drawn earlier, the deck will be reshuffled and the game could continue. And while reshuffling the deck, again those 2 cards can be sorted in either way, which means that you can have several reshuffles before the game ends, or the game can very abruptly end. The same applies to the moment when the Royal Navy markers enter the game. Sometimes they will enter very late into the game because even you had a lot of QQQ or RRR markers on the board, you rolled in such a way that the Royal Navy markers didn't appear. Over times, even having one marker on the game on the map will be sufficient in order to trigger a Royal Navy counter placement. So this is something which is too random in my opinion, because in the game you have a lot of control over things which can happen. You can manage your cards, you can decide where to cruise, where to move, which markers to inspect, if to attack them, etc. But at the same time, you will not have control over everything. And the thing which you will absolutely have no control over is the way how the cards are placed and how the rolls will look like. I do not have anything about long games. I do not have any problem with dice rolling either. But in this game, I felt that the game tends to drag too long, and at the same time, it also can very quickly end. And this is something which, in my opinion, is quite a problem, because I would like to have an expectation concerning how long the game can how long the game can last, and what I can achieve during such a period. Having no clue how long the game will last is at times problematic. Having said all that, I believe that Raider 16 Atlantis is really a very good game. It is a game which deserved and still deserves to be published, which deserves to be polished and then released in order to make it an enjoyable product, which could be interesting for a lot of players. Remember that the game was designed in 2011 when solitaire war games were not very popular. They were still there, but they weren't as popular as today, when solo gaming is generally on the rise. So maybe this product still has a big potential, because I believe it's a very clever game, a game covering an extremely interesting topic, a game which I really enjoy and which I would love to see as a final product released by one of the editors. Maybe it will happen someday. This was the review of Raider 16 Atlantis, a game designed by Bruce Mansfield and published on BoardGameGeek in 2011. Thank you for watching it. I invite you also to take a look at our other videos. Take also a look at what I am posting on my Facebook and my Instagram accounts. Have a great day and see you next time.